What if the people society writes off are the ones who teach us how to lead? In this episode of MarketPulse, Dr Alison Schmidt shares how working with gang-affiliated kids transformed her understanding of leadership and how those lessons now shape the world boardrooms. From carrying shame to embracing her neurodiversity, Alison's journey is proof that empathy and authenticity aren't soft skills. They're the foundation of trust, performance, and purpose. This is leadership with humanity at its core, raw, unfiltered, and utterly inspiring. I'm a big believer that if you're looking for a little bit outside the box that's well-rounded and able to do a lot of different tasks that they've not necessarily been trained on, retail and hospitality are the go-to industries for me, because we're so flexible and talented in that respect.
I have always found, especially in kids and adolescents, they're just looking for someone that really gets them and kind of understands them, and not realizing that their past doesn't have to define their future. Because I never took no for an answer. I think I was receiving a lot of messages that I can't do something. That was more of the message, that you couldn't do something, than the message I think that it is today of you can. These aren't things that need to stop you. My goal is to globally bring the human side back to business. The most unconventional thing for me that I could have done was giving myself the permission to be unconventional. And no matter what anyone's going to say, do, it didn't matter. We're looking for platforms where we can express ourselves. The business is going to be there. We'll get to that, and that's crucially important. We have to allow incorporation for employees to be able to express themselves. A good leader is also internal. I have some skill sets as a leader that you're not going to find anywhere. It's in my DNA and through my own experience.
How do you break the rules without breaking yourself and build a career where bold decisions lead to real transformation? Dr Alison Schmidt is the founder and CEO of Unconvention, a leadership coaching and organizational consulting firm that rejects one-size-fits-all solutions. With over 20 years of experience working alongside CXOs, boards, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders, Alison specializes in uncovering what's really blocking the progress and then designing high-impact strategies that break through barriers and create lasting momentum. She's also the creator and host of Unconversations, a podcast where executives and disruptors share raw, unconventional stories of defying the norms, embracing change, and redefining their success. Alison's approach blends candid honesty with a commitment to building cultures where innovation is lived daily, and a PhD in organizational psychology, as well as being a board-certified coach. Alison draws inspiration from global travel with her wife Norma, infusing her work with diverse perspectives and a drive for meaningful change. Alison, wow, what a bio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I'm listening to that. And now I understand how my guests feel when I kind of introduce them, because you're sitting here like, wow, I have done a lot. Thank you. I am just so happy to be here. Thank you for the very warm welcome to your show.
More than welcome, more than welcome. I'm going to dive straight in like I do with all of our guests, because there's so much to cover amongst all of that. And I really want to get through as much as I can, because I know your story is going to be absolutely fascinating for a lot of our audience. Let's rewind back to, what was your first paid role? What was your first salary job? And what led you there? Because that's often where it starts.
Yeah. I actually worked in retail. So I worked for Gap for a bit of time. One, I loved fashion, and Gap was very fashionable back then. And of course, I loved working with people. And I I did have some people at a time that I, mentored in that process, coached in that process. And like I said, it was kind of an easy job because it kind of blend the things that I really enjoyed. And then I kind of moved into, I also worked for the Marriott at a certain period of time. So I was in hospitality. I actually thought I was going to go down the hospitality road, and then I figured I didn't think that was a place for me. I think because I wanted to change so much of what the different roles and responsibilities that I was doing that I was thinking to myself, I don't know if hospitality, I think I'm a better guest than I am a better employee to work in that space. And then again, still working with people, I decided that I was in social work for a period of time. So I was working with gang kids. And I started to get quite burnt out of that. And I moved then kind of in the role of doing more family and adolescent therapy, not necessarily more working with the gang kids side. And then when I decided that I thought I was going to get my PhD in clinical psychology, I had this passion, I know we'll get into that, of business and people, which is sort of why organizational psychology kind of became a really natural fit for me.
Wow. So, I mean, e- even just in that early intro, we've gone from retail and hospitality, which I know a lot of people that connect between the two, and I'm former retail, and I'm a big believer that anybody who cuts their teeth in a career in retail or hospitality really learns so many transferable skills.
Oh,
There's
totally.
a whole we tend to box ourselves into doing more of the same, and a lot of people stay in that career for life. But actually, I'm a big believer that if you're looking for somebody a little bit outside the box that's well rounded and is able to do a lot of different tasks that they've not necessarily been trained on, retail and hospitality are the go-to industries for me because we're so flexible and talented in that respect.
Oh,
But
I
then
would totally agree with you on that. And it's a very high paced. Both of those industries
yes,
are extremely
and high pressure.
grueling and
Yeah.
high paced, which I will say a lot of those skills that I learned in those experiences, I still use to this day. And plus, I have a huge admiration for those individuals that do work in those industries, without a doubt.
Yeah, you can't not appreciate people in that, but once you've been there and done it yourself, right? Yeah, I 100% get that. Um, how did you end up working with gang kids and social work? Was
Yeah,
like
that
on the back
normally,
end of that, where
I
it's
think
a jump.
I think my parents asked me the same thing because I certainly did not grow up that way. I grew up very middle class, but I loved. You know what it is? I think for me it was a challenge. I didn't, even though I grew up middle class, I did go through my own struggles. And my parents were there to help me to the best of their ability. And I have always found, especially in kids and adolescents, they're just looking for someone that really gets them and kind of understands them and not realizing that their past necessarily doesn't have to define their future. And I was just drawn. I was really drawn to really helping those kids. I was living at the time in Los Angeles. So, people would be very surprised to know that I was walking the streets in Compton, which as a Caucasian woman, were predominantly Black people were in that area. It was very like, whoa, what are you doing here? But I think because of the differences, and I think because of my empathy, not necessarily coming from a place of feeling sorry for these kids, but more wanting to understand them. I think I was able to do some amazing work and really help a lot of kids more or less than not. But on the flip side of that, I noticed within myself that I was becoming quite a hard person, meaning you're seeing a lot on the streets and seeing what these kids go through, not only the mental, physical, sexual abuse that could possibly go on, the living conditions that some of these kids were living. You have to kind of protect yourself a bit. And when I went through that process, it was kind of, I didn't sort of like what was sort of happening with me, which is where I needed to kind of take a step back and kind of redefine what sort of additional focus I wanted to do as a career moving forward.
I can imagine. I can't imagine some of the things you've heard and stories you've had told to you. I mean, we have gang life here in England, but I don't think it very rarely edges onto the scale that I know that from friends and connections that I've got in the States, that certainly in areas like Compton and many others that you must see. So it's an amazing gift that you've been given to be able to work with people. And as you say, I think the important thing is not coming from these people, like, they don't want people to feel sorry for them, right? Like, they just do want to be understood. And I think that's an amazing differentiation to be able to make for a lot of people. So you've always had people in your soul, right? Like, this is what fills you up, is that.
For sure.
Helping people become better than what they are.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
What's your earliest memory of then challenging the status quo to help shape the path that you've taken since then?
You and I spoke about this before, and I think one of the things that really resonated with you, and I really appreciate you allowing me to share this, but I was diagnosed with a learning disability. I've always had it, of course, but this was something that was fully diagnosed when I was 18 years old, about to graduate from high school. And during that time, it was difficult because, I didn't know how to really explain what was kind of going on with me. My parents didn't know really what was going on. All they wanted to know was, what do I need to do to get my child to graduate and we can send her to a good school. But that process during that was very transactional, not really. Back then, there wasn't people that you could really talk to, that you could really kind of have empathy and support. It was more of, okay, let's figure out what's going on. Let's figure out what box we're going to put her in, so we know how to treat this and move on. And so for me, again, that was the best, that, the environment you're talking about, the 80s, and the type of tests that were out there, that was really the best they could do. However, though, for me, I felt it was a stigma. And I had this piece of paper that they gave to me when I was diagnosed, and I carried this piece of paper around with me up until I graduated from my PhD. So this is something from 1989. I'm just about to date myself. And I carried this piece of paper because it was the only way that I could get special accommodations for testing and other things that I would need. And it wasn't a lot, but the accommodations that I need back then seemed like they were life-changing. Today, they're probably like, you need some extra time, no worries. It's all good.
Yeah.
But for some reason, back then, it was, that is not fair to the masses. You may need that, instead of going, yes, you have something, this is going to help you achieve and be great like your other counterparts. But instead, it was looked at, we don't want to show favoritism. And so that's why I had to carry this piece of paper. And I think for me, I think it made me stronger. I think it has made me a great businesswoman. And I think it also has made me very good at what I'm able to do in my coaching and consulting practice that I've had for 30 years. And being able to not only help my clients with transactional things they may need, but also for me, it's really that human side. And I think going through what I went through early on has made me even more of an empathetic and understanding person that I am today.
It's interesting, like you've mentioned, like the unspecified learning disability, which I find in equal parts interesting and frustrating, and I almost feel a frustration on your behalf, because how can we know that there is something I need support with, but not be able to put a name to what that is?
Right.
That's almost a contradiction in itself, right?
Well, they had a name for it, but it wasn't a very good name. It was a very derogatory name that they would probably use, that they used then, that would be completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And what that could do to someone.
As with a lot of things in the 80s, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the conversation I had with the charity partner for our show, which is ADHD Liberty, and the lady who runs that, Sarah Templeton, I met because I'd listened to the audio book that she'd released, which is titled "How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kids," and she's the most British person for an audio book, right? So she's very kind of almost sounds like a posh accent when she speaks.
Sure.
But she's very down to earth with it. So it's I can't really describe it, but go away and have a listen to it if you've got time, because it's just a phenomenal listen. And I identified so much of myself in that book when I was trying to find out about my son. And I contacted her and said, I'd love to have you on the show. I'd love to have you on the show. And she said yes. But during that show, her story was that she'd been a prison counselor for a decade. And at the age of 52, she was diagnosed ADHD. Mm-hmm. And what she realized was the reason why she'd been able to connect with all of the prisoners that she'd worked with so well was because she truly understood the way their brain worked. And what she now does is a lot of important work on how to break the school to prison pipeline for undiagnosed or unmedicated ADHD people, which to me it's got a lot in common with the story that you've just shared there, with being able to reach gang kids and working almost unafraid in that environment, because you know that up here you've connected with them, you see them, you understand them, not that you've experienced what they've experienced, because that's not true, but you've learned to understand what motivates them, why they do the things they do, and you can speak to them on their level where you kind of shared that energy together. But I do wonder, did you think that kind of level of empathy and understanding is something that then helped you stand out in your field and kind of motivate you towards getting that PhD then?
Without a doubt, Paul. I think the other thing, as I was going through my PhD program, and I think, it's interesting because I actually have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. And so one of my master's degree is in education, clinical education. Then as I was getting my PhD in organizational psychology, you get a master's, you go through that process, and then And so what was kind of an oxymoron about all this is because I feel like I'm a better speaker And writing is probably one of the hardest things for me. And reading is also one of the hardest things for me. Because for me, when I read something, I had to read word for word for word and then go back and put it together. And then the sentence then makes sense to me. That is usually why multiple choice questions are like, usually my demise. But because of, I never took no for an answer. I think I was receiving a lot of messages that I can't do something. I think back then that was more of the message that you couldn't do something than the message I think that it is today of you can. These aren't things that need to stop you. And so for me, that's really, I was my mentor really. And I didn't realize much of that until I went through my own executive coaching and my own therapy that I've done, that I needed to give myself that credit to be able to go, no matter what was getting in your way, you still knew that you could achieve it. You knew it was going to be hard as hell. And you know it was going to be a tough road. And there were times I was just crying out of pure frustration. But at the end of the day, I knew there was no other way but to complete it. And I also think that comes to from which is why on my podcast that I hope we get to too, is I interview elite coaches and athletes because I myself was a competitive swimmer and I also ran. And so I think sports was really a lifeline for me because that gave me a healthy way to deal with my frustrations or deal with insecurities or deal with if I was feeling anxiety or feeling depressed. I knew that if there was outlet for me through sports, I think also has helped me get to the individual that I am today.
I think from people that I've spoken to, I think there's something special about swimming, that it's kind of it's almost sensory stimulation for a lot of people, and it makes it very easy to focus in the moment.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of other sports can be quite loud and intimidating, and team sports, you've got to work together, you've got to listen to what people are saying. Whereas swimming, a lot of the time it's a solo sport.
Yes.
And you're in the water, and I've heard a lot of people say, I just find peace.
Yes.
I find peace in that moment when I'm underwater and nothing else matters. And I
And
think that's
it's true. It's you and the current of the water, and how fast you're gonna go. You're 100% about that. Yeah, it is. It's a very kind of peaceful, but and it's breathing is a very big part of swimming, and knowing when to breathe. And knowing when to breathe can either make or break that particular race. And I have learned that and taken that valuable lesson throughout my career. Because when I am feeling something overstimulating or has me not feeling balanced, I think about that moment of being in the water and getting my breath in check, and that helps me tremendously.
So if we kind of go back to the your work timeline, I guess, what was the point where you realized you didn't fit into the traditional corporate mold? Was there a turning point for you where kind of a switch flipped?
Yeah.
What was it?
I think I have always felt that. I kind of made a joke on another podcast. I think it was even when I came out of my mom's womb that I've always felt that way. And I sort of almost felt like an outcast in that way. Because I am such an inquisitive person. And I don't ask why, meaning why because I just want to say why, or I think something needs to change because internally I feel I'm right about something. I think one of my, we'll use the term that people say, I guess, superpower, is I'm able to really look at a situation very differently than sometimes other people and in such a deeper way. And I try to cover that up a bit because I, people weren't responding well to that because they wanted me to conform and just say yes or agree with either it was my boss or the coworker or whatever the case may be. And even in my family, I have always been just an inquisitive person, and I like to understand how things work. I like to understand how people think. And I tried very hard to lessen that until I started my own business. And when I started my own business this was my first one. It was called ALS Group. And I think at that time when I gave myself the freedom to not conform and to not do what everyone else is doing, I was getting a lot more positive reinforcement than actually negative reinforcement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I think that resonates for a lot of us who've gone off and built our own business. Certainly my experience of the neurodiverse crew that I speak to, I find that, I remember conversations when I was at work, and exactly what you've said resonates really so much, because I remember a specific conversation with my area manager when I was running retail stores, and his frustration with me boiled over one morning, about 3:00 in the morning. We'd done a stock take the night before, and we were still all there, and it was me and like four of my colleagues who were also managers, and he was dishing out jobs, and he asked me to do something, and I just went, but why? Why are we doing that? Right? And he was like, Paul, it doesn't matter why. Why can't you just toe the company line for once? Your life would be much easier if you just did what you were asked. And I was like, well, it might be, but that's not the way I'm wired.
Yeah.
I need to know why, because what you've told me to do doesn't seem to make sense. If you can explain there's something that I don't understand, then I can get behind that, and you'll not find anybody who will be more passionate about doing what you've asked.
Exactly.
But if you expect me to do something that potentially it doesn't have a positive benefit to anybody that I can see, or a positive impact in any way, shape or form, you just want me to change a process for the sake of changing it, you will not find anybody who will drag their heels more than I will. And you can discipline me, you can put me on the naughty step, you can do what you like, but I will not do it out of principle.
Yeah.
And we never quite, there was I didn't realize I was ADHD at the time. There was no conversation about that. Corporate world, we didn't discuss neurodiversity in any way.
Oh, no, not at all.
But what you've said just,
yeah,
it's funny. And I bet there are so many people out there who are kind of stuck in that same rut and don't even realize why they find those things frustration. So for me, it's quite liberating. What happened with ALS then? So you mentioned that was your first business.
So I had ALS Group, and I had that business for over 20 years, and then COVID hit, and everything just. It was a horrible time. It was a very stressful time for me. I was traveling quite often. Everything just completely stopped with the whole world. I had contracts that people were like, we don't know what's happening, what's going on. And so I was talking to my wife, and I was like, okay, so I don't know how long this is going to go. And then I'm sitting here like, how do I do what I do and do as well as I can do it with my clients over this kind of, we've had WebEx around for a while. We had Zoom. These were meetings. But how do I really connect with someone so strongly? How do you get accountability from your clients over this screen? So that was one of my initial thoughts. And then the other initial thought that came to my mind was, wow, I had this moment to really sit here, stop, and reflect. Like, when do we really get to do that? And And so I'm an avid cyclist. I don't run much anymore. And so I went out for a long bike ride. Next day, got up, went out for a long bike ride. And I had a discussion with myself, and it was like, if you could do something, time wasn't an issue, would you keep doing the kind of consulting work that you're doing and the coaching work that you're doing? And I answered myself honestly that I felt that there were some missing pieces to my offerings, to what I enjoy doing with people, where I like to help corporations. And I went through my process, and I decided that ALS Group was no longer the name. Yes, it's me, but it was no longer serving itself in the context that I first started this company. And my company is called Unconventional, as you mentioned, because one, that is embracing me as being an unconventional CEO and leader, and embracing all the wonderful things about me personally and professionally that make up this unconventional individual. And the type of offerings and the work and the type of clients I want to work with. And you also mentioned I'm the creator and host of Unconversations. And I mean, I had people talk to me about doing that, and I was like, okay, so I'm going to now do something where it's not very competitive in the podcast market. Like, what am I going to do? Like, okay, let me see how I can play in this space. And as you said, we interview unconventionally excellent global CXOs, entrepreneurs, and founders. And my goal is to globally begin to bring the human side back to business, and where we can understand the human side of these leaders and what truly, besides their tactical work that they do, and they're amazing, their own companies or the companies that they're employed with, but there's also this amazing person and amazing stories that need to be shared and talked about that got them to where they are today. And I, like you and I were just talking before, it is just one of my greatest highlights is being, and I think I feel more honored to have my guests come on. They tell me they're honored, and I appreciate that. But I feel the honor just because of the level and the vulnerability that my guests are willing to go to. It's really a special podcast.
I love that. But I have to ask, as one podcast host to another, Alison,
Yes.
how do you come across unconventional leaders in order to invite them on the podcast? Because let's be honest, there is no LinkedIn filter for conventional versus unconventional. So
Correct.
How do you find them?
Well, I started out doing a couple of what I like to call cold call on LinkedIn. I either loved the person's brand, I loved what they talked about, I loved the product. It was all the above. And I have to tell you now, it's more people who have been on the show after they've gone through the process that they're like, this is really cool. And part of what makes my podcast very uniquely different is I have my guests go through what I coined the unword effect. And I had each of my guests think of 3 words that begin with un. And here in the States, the un sometimes in the English language here in the US can have a very negative connotation, a meaning to it. And so I have my guests think about what that process was like for them when I asked them to think about these unwords. I had them come up with those unwords and talk about them individually. And it's been amazing because you get this really unique understanding, in-depth understanding of who this individual is by just how they came up with these unwords through the process and the individual words themselves. And even sometimes I'm even shocked. I'm like, wow, that is such a great word for that person. And then they'll even go into it further. And I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that word had so much meaning to them.
Yeah.
And some of the unwords could be have a negative, and the guest will speak of it in a way where this really contributed to the early part of their life, but how they actually overcame it to a much more positive experience. But even if the word was negative for them, it is still a learning process that they went through. And it's amazing what they shared through that process to where that word now no longer identifies or holds a negative meaning to them, if that makes sense.
How did you come up with that idea? What inspired you to ask them that in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. What inspired me really was when people ask me about myself, we use these words. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm Dr. Alison Schmidt, and, I'm CEO of X company. And it's the same sort of, and I was like, well, that's really intriguing. I mean, those are just like physical things about me, but it doesn't really tell people really who I am and what I'm about. And I spoke to a colleague of mine when I was trying to come up with the name of my company, Unconvention. And she's from Paris. And she said, I don't know, there's something around this un. And I think it could be an amazing branding for your company. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Okay. And so I started doing
I'm
my
hearing
own.
that in a French accent as you said it.
Oh, it was amazing. Oh yeah, I will tell you, it sounds way sexier when she said in an accent than having it with a US or a New York / Texas accent. I was like, so say that to me again. Why I should do this? No, it sounded great. I really should just have her do more of my podcast intros for me. But yeah, I brought myself to my own unword effect. I didn't know what it was going to be called. And in fact, I didn't come up with that unword effect until April of this year. And then I started trying it out with certain guests and seeing how it was going to flow. But the concept behind it is actually what I went through myself. And I did identify my own unwords. And at the time, my unwords were unconventional, of course, unapologetic, and undeterred. Were my three. And it just helped. It just kind of helped me how I talk to people about myself, because I've just been so used to talking like this. And I'm like, God, I'm bored of myself. There's more to me than just these degrees and my title. And I wanted to find a way to help get to the core and who I am today. And that's sort of how that process all began.
That's a brilliant story. I love that. I'm so pleased I asked that. So then I guess your focus is around unconventional leadership, which makes me want to ask the question, what's the most unconventional leadership decision you've made that you're the most proud of, I think? Not the most unconventional decision, but which one are you most proud of? What did that teach you?
I will tell you, my earlier career, I did things very unconventional. I did things conventionally, I did things very conventionally. I did things the way textbook wise we should do, very kind of systemically. And I didn't realize how unfulfilling that really was for me. And I do feel confidently that it was serving my clients, of course, to the best of my ability. But I would have to say COVID for me was such a blessing, because it to me, my family was safe, thankfully. And I got to go, yeah, I want to start having fun. really good fun with what I'm doing. And I think allowing myself finally 50 to not do the things that people would expect me to do. And so this is probably the most fun I've had, not only doing this podcast, which scared me to death. I don't know when you first it did me, not that I don't like talking to people, but I'm very hard on myself because I want to produce a really great uh, product, and I want to do really well by the guests that is sharing the space with me during their episode. So for me, I think the most unconventional thing for me that I could have done was giving myself the permission to be unconventional. And no matter what anyone's going to say, do, it didn't matter. I gave myself that freedom. And I know with the response that I've been getting from people, the level of connections that I've been able to get, you know, it's just been super fun. It's just been a lot of fun. And I think that's how I knew it was time to make that change.
I think there's so many people that could learn a lesson from that, Alison, because it's very much in line with a lot of the things that I've preached for so long. You know, I mean, I left corporate world in 2020, just as COVID was hitting, and I'd always worked in person, and that time I was working in retail as COVID kicked off, and it was awful. It was an awful experience to having
horrible.
to go to work during that, when so many people were, you know, we're working from home now. We get a laptop and I can protect my family, and I'm the guy that's, you know, still going out there and putting myself on the line. But the more I've come away from that corporate world, and I guess unincorporated myself, so if I want to use an unword, there's one for me, like that's so tough for people to do, is to switch from getting permission to speak my mind or to say something that might contradict our policies and procedures, to just being able to express myself. You know, I remember my very first guest podcast. I was podcasting. I was asked to be a guest on a retail loss prevention podcast, because that's my background. I did a lot of work in loss prevention and fraud, and I still remember getting on that audio only podcast and being absolutely terrified when they hit the record button and asked me to introduce myself, because what was going through my head was, you know, you're just a store manager. You've just worked in retail for 15 years, but you're not a senior leader. You've never run your own business. You've never done all of these things. Why would anybody want to listen to you? And there was this voice was so real, and I found myself, like, I'm quite a confident talker on those sorts of things, but I just found myself hyperventilating. And for the first 10 minutes, I've listened to that podcast since, the first 10 minutes are awful, because I'm just like, yep, I remember my brain just reeling, like, what do I say? What do I say? How do I make sure I don't say anything that's going to get me in trouble? What if somebody who I used to work with is listening to this, and what would they think of me?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to introduce myself at the same time, and I'm still figuring on my own story and how to introduce myself. You're right. It's absolutely petrifying, but at the same time, it's so liberating once you get used to it, because you become your own voice of reason, I think. And to your point, that passion is paramount.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, it's interesting because when, you know, being in this space of coaching and consulting, which I've done for a very long time, but when I decided to do the podcast, I remember, you know, hey, you should reach out to your friends and family and ask them for, you know, referrals on who, whatever. And I remember clearly, I asked one of my really very close friend, and and the first words weren't like, "Man, that sounds freaking cool. I love what you're gonna do. That's like really awesome." It was like, "So, what do you think is gonna be in it for your guest?" And I was like, and my head just was just like, "What? Like, what do you mean? Like, I just told you. Like, this is like great. I mean, like, what do you mean? How's this not?" It was like the difference at that point for that person was what is it in for them money-wise? Meaning, how could anyone do something without there necessarily being a monetary connection to it? And I will say, I have had more people. I think I only had one person that said that they don't do anything without being paid, and their friends have asked them to, and they need to be paid. And I'm like, oh, hey, I get it, all good. And then I had one other person that kind of had a similar thing. But I will tell you, the rest of that, I have just been like, I've been so looking forward to this because you said it perfectly. And I think your podcast does a beautiful job in this too. We're looking for platforms where we can express ourselves. The business is going to be there. We'll get to that, and that's crucially important. But I think also being able to express ourselves, tell people who we are, I think is also just as important, because that person's like, oh man, I heard you on this podcast. You had the vibe I like. I love the way you talk. I just get this really great connection. And I want to do coaching with you. Like, I get it. I mean, you are probably going to kick my ass, and I want you. And that's why I think blending both of these components, and I think corporations also, I was reading in some of your questions, and one of them really stood out to me. They all did, by the way. We have to allow in corporation for employees to be able to express themselves. And I think that's going to really help with, and not just when we meet with an employee, we're talking about tactical things, performance things. Has this been completed? When's it going to be completed? But really understand, because we're in a very interesting time here in the States. And with our administration, what is happening, and we're also dealing with the pressures of what's happening with corporations here. There are layoffs. There's probably going to be many more layoffs, which is probably going to be happening right before the holidays. That's usually the time that kind of happens. And, I think leaders need to spend more time being empathetic and understanding and what their employees are going through, as well as their roles and responsibilities that are needing to be met in the organization. And I really speak about that clearly. Yes, you can be a great leader, but I think one of the greatest skill sets as a leader is to be empathetic and understanding, as well as the tactical things that you need to make sure that your team obviously is responsible.
I think it's a super rare skill set though, right? Like leaders, even the ones that are capable of both, feel the pressure to not be both, because the problem for a lot of companies always comes from above, right? It comes down from the top level and comes down from investors and shareholders and whoever, and they want to see results. And results mean things need to be measured, and empathy can't be measured, really. It can, but kind of not in the same way that investors and shareholders care about, right?
Of course.
Nobody's ever going to stand up and say, well, you know what? Empathy levels were up 30% this year, and that's in line with our revenue increase, and so we're all going to be more empathetic. That would be a great time, right? Like, everybody would love to be able to do that. But I think that's what drives a lot of the challenges that we see in leadership, and certainly in Western culture, right? Like, I think that's a massive problem that we need to address and get to grip of, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in this constant loop of it's in corporate life, the best people freeing themselves and becoming entrepreneurs and founding their own businesses and moving on with life. But who's left running the corporate world? Because we need people in that corporate life. Like, it's not like we can just all extract ourselves and be happy.
Of course.
We need people in the corporate life. So hats off to anybody that can go into that environment and help make a difference, because I think it's certainly needed. I can't imagine how brave the leaders have to be in the first place to even request the help right? To get coaching in.
Yeah.
Because you need to acknowledge a problem first, right?
Definitely. Definitely.
I wonder what's, in your experience then, Alison, obviously you've worked with lots of leaders, you've worked with lots of industry sectors. What's working in leadership and business right now that leaders should pay more attention to, aside from kind of empathy and understanding? What's something that you think everybody's missing?
I think really what they're missing is I think proper training of their and proper coaching of their and also asking your employees what they really want to do and where they want to go. I find that where leaders aren't spending the time asking their team what they really enjoy doing. I think they just go, "Oh, we'll move so and so into this role, and that'll be really great."
Yeah.
And then that person doesn't necessarily want to say no because they're at risk that their job is probably, well, then we'll find someone else who wants to do it, and you'll be let go.
Yeah.
And so, I think what leaders need to do is a lot of these things are very cyclical. We're doing the same things and we're getting the same results. Like, to me, it's amazing that we're talking about retention. Like, retention to me is just like, I can't believe we're still talking about it because there's studies, there's clear things that corporations can honestly do that are not very expensive, because what's expensive is turnover. And we do not want to look at that number because that number, we just don't want to see it. And I will tell you, I have been preaching this too since I was in graduate school, that I can't believe we're in this same place. But I also think we also need to spend the time and really get the people that we want to move into these leadership roles, not just trained because we have a set training company. And as long as they go in and check the box on all their trainings, that great. They checked the box, they achieved everything they needed to. You are now a leader and go lead. Doesn't make an effective leader. That has educated them with some tools to consider. But a good leader is also internal, because I have some skill sets as a leader that you're not going to find in a textbook. It's in my DNA and through my own experience, on top of the things that I, have learned through many years of schooling and being on the job. And so I think if we spend time asking people what type of work do they really enjoy doing and let those people do that. Also have proper succession planning, because if people know that if they work hard and showing the results, that there's a next step for them, then they're going to be even more committed to wanting to even work harder for the company that they're working. But I find with leadership, we tend to alienate employees. We don't want to talk to them. Then they finally get really upset, and then they're like, "That's it. I'm going to leave." And statistically speaking, 9 times out of 10, it still shows up as the number one reason that employees will leave a company because of their managers. It is not necessarily because of the money aspect. It's because there could be a combination of that, of course. But usually it's because of the managers, of why, or their direct reports, of why they're leaving.
I think we need to see a culture change where we take ownership of the leaders for tomorrow. And I think it's a very short-sighted leadership approach that we see that drives a lot of these problems. It's somebody else's problem tomorrow, as long as I've done my job.
Correct. Sure.
Which, but we can all make that positive difference in our own way. Alison, we could probably do this for like 3 or 4 hours, and I'd still be here asking you questions. So like, I need to draw the episode to a close, but I would love to have you come back at some point. But before I do that, I've got an unconventional question for you, which I've never asked any guest before, but I'm inspired by the conversation that we've had.
Oh, I'm honored.
As a child, what was your favorite board game and why?
I loved, what's that game? Twister. I love Twister. Twister was really great. Are you familiar with Twister?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love Twister. It was like, so, can I count that as a board game? Because I mean, you get in all these like crazy.
I'll give you it.
Okay.
I asked
Wow.
you an unconventional question. You give me an unconventional answer to the unconventional question. So we'll live with that, right?
You can see I don't follow the rules. I could say, could it also be, I did like the card. I know it's not a board game. I mean, listen, I played Monopoly before, so of course, I love Monopoly. That's a great game. But I have to say, probably one of the most fun I had is playing Twister, because it was, of course, because it's a group. It's kind of a
Yep,
group
yeah.
game, and everyone gets all like twisted up, and I don't know. It's just kind of fun.
I love it. I love it. Alison, you've been an absolutely fabulous guest. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, Paul, thank you. It has been an absolute honor, and thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I enjoyed every moment of it.
You're more than welcome, and we will, like I said, we will have you back because I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and there's so much more we can dive into. If you're watching along at home and you've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, have a look in the show notes because all of Alison's links will be in there. So if you want to contact Alison, you want to find out a bit more about Unconvention, absolutely do that. If you want to find a podcast and give that a subscribe, a follow, please do, because I'm a big fan of all of our guests who have their own podcasts. We need to spread the word about good podcasts because God knows there's enough poor quality stuff out there that's just bland. If you've listened to this episode, you're going to know that Alison's will be anything but. And thank you, listeners, watchers at home for coming along and watching this episode. As ever, if you have any ideas for guests, anybody you'd like to see on the show and topics you'd like covered, please drop me a line, let me know. But please, above all else, give us a subscribe and a follow. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes, and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued support.